Greetings, comrades, from the socialist state of A Valid Answer with our corporate American flag. I don't know what I'm saying.
People's Republic of California.
The People's Republic of A Valid Answer. No, I'm Scott. This is Marshall. It's a pastor and an atheist getting together, having discussions, arguments, not quite fist fights, but very close.
Right. Well, we're here today to talk about socialism.
So evil, right?
Right. You know, we can't do anything that's socialist because that would be socialism.
That would be socialism. So you can't do anything socialist because that would be socialism. So
yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your flag that you brought here, and why did you do that?
This is my corporate America flag. I brought it to offend people.
You notice that I only let him hang it on his side of the screen.
I actually had it at the beach on the 4th of July, and a guy came up to my buddy who was with me and said, "I'm offended by that."
Good, you should be.
And I agree. That's exactly my response, is you should be offended by this flag because, to me, it shows who our republic truly represents, who our government truly represents. You and I, in my opinion, in my belief, do not have much of a voice in the halls of Congress. Instead, it's corporate America with all of their big donors who have all of the share of voice in Congress, and the laws that they pass and so on are all dictated by these guys back here. And
so how would you like to change that?
Well, I would actually like to move towards what I would call social democracy, which is where the people have more of a voice in how tax revenue are spent.
And how is that different? I mean, how do you make that happen?
Well, I think we would have to change a few things. We'd certainly have to change a lot of laws, including campaign finance reform.
Okay.
We would have to outlaw private corporations from donating to political campaigns and basically holding politicians in thrall to their will. We would have to do a number of reforms. Corporations could not be people anymore, at least not in the same sense that they are today.
Okay.
I get that the idea of corporate personhood may have some practical applications. I imagine there's a way we could preserve those practical applications without also saying, well, you know, corporate money is also speech. When you say that money equates to speech and that a corporation has the right to spend unlimited quantities of money on political speech, you're essentially allowing corporations to hijack the share of voice because airtime has a price.
Yep.
And you and I could never afford airtime. That's why we're, you know, fighting back on the free web here. But
you're a person who is presently occupying airtime,
right?
Who didn't have to pay for it, complaining about how people who don't have money don't have access to airtime. Yet here we are.
But look at the share of voice. I mean, you have to understand that if I can buy a political ad in the middle of the Super Bowl, I'm going to reach a lot more people with my professional, you know, artsy message than I'm ever going to reach on this podcast.
Eventually, would you ever like to be able to purchase a spot on the Super Bowl to voice your political views?
No, but I would like my political views to be heard. I would not want political views to be contingent upon money.
Okay.
I want ideas to be put out in the marketplace of ideas, and I want them to clash with other ideas, and I want them to be evaluated on their merit, not based on wealth.
So far, everything that you've explained has nothing to do with being a socialist country.
Well, you might think that, but
no, I'm saying your solutions. You say you want a democratic socialist society, but I'm trying to
social democracy,
but I'm trying to figure out
my preferred strain of socialism.
But I'm trying to figure out. So far, everything that you're saying is not that.
What do you mean it's not that?
That's not creating, how you call it, was social democracy, democratic socialism. Say the phrase again.
Well, there's actually a slight technical difference between the two.
Which one are you saying again?
Social democracy.
Social democracy. So continue on with what your solutions towards social democracy would be. So far, the things that you're saying just sound
like reforms.
It sounds like reforms, but it doesn't mean that you can do those reforms and still have a capitalist market.
You sure can, and that's why I like social democracy.
But explain to me how these are a social democracy. I don't quite see what.
Well, social
how
democracy
is it still not capitalism?
Is a form of socialism that embraces capitalism, but there are some limits and restrictions on capitalism. You cannot use your capitalist influence to basically give yourself an unfair market advantage, like a lot of corporations and businesses do here in the United States.
What do you mean unfair market advantage?
Well, first of all,
if you create the better widget, are you not allowed to sell it?
Oh, of course you are.
Are you not allowed to destroy your competition?
Well, to a degree, but you're not allowed to be a monopoly.
Okay, but if you are
illegal,
right? I'm not talking about
monopolies.
But what I'm talking about is, what do you mean by they cannot use their power? What I want to find,
they cannot. People are buying politicians here in the United States. That's what this flag is trying to communicate. That these corporations are able to buy your elected representatives. So the person from your community who you elect to represent you in the halls of Congress is not representing you. They're answering to these people. And these people, none of these people that I know of are based right here in my community. So why would he be listening to any of these people? I get that they have interests and they have a voice, and their voice should be heard. We should listen to, the business people and the people that make, Wall Street run. We should listen to them. They should have a voice. But that voice should not be disproportionate. It should not wash out the voice of the public.
So, okay, all right. Okay, I'm still trying to, we're both on the same page here. I'm trying to find out.
Well, because it's reasonable. But we want to talk about socialism, right? So I wanted to ask you, as my opening question to you really, is what do you believe socialism is? Because there's a lot to talk about. It's a big topic. Yeah. And I want to ask you, what do you think socialism is?
How I see socialism, and that's probably a question that I should have been more prepared for. The things how we're talking about this, I was thinking about other things of what we're going to talk about, but I guess it's the idea that what I see as crossing the line of what I don't like about socialism is the idea that people are dependent upon the government for X, Y, and Z. Things that they need to sustain, they're dependent on the government instead of on themselves. And that's what I want to avoid. I want to avoid that if the government controls the healthcare, if the government controls wages, if the government controls all these different things, then the government has a say in how you live your life. If they control those things, they can control how you live your life.
Would you prefer a private corporation control those things?
Yes. I would prefer a private corporation to provide those things, because then I can choose a different corporation.
If they provide it, and in particular if they become a monopolistic entity, which we're starting to see with things like Amazon, and certainly, we have Facebook.
Which is really funny. Which is really funny when you mention Amazon, because 10 years ago you would have mentioned Walmart, but not anymore, because a competitor came in and beat them at their own game and provided a better service that customers wanted and are willing to pay this company instead of that company. So eventually somebody will come and beat Amazon. That's the market. The market will work. So, the market is, your example shows that your example is showing that the market has worked and is working, because 5 years ago you would have said Walmart, but Walmart has been beaten. You would have said Walmart, but Walmart is now being beaten by a competitor, not by the government, but by a competitor who is providing a better service for the money to the people. The market is choosing and making that happen.
But you understand that monopolies are a thing and monopolies are bad, and that Walmart has not yet, or was not 5 years ago, it was not a monopoly.
Well, either way, it is on the downhill because somebody is beating them. And somebody,
as our JCPenney, Sears, and
25
and
years
host
ago,
of other
25 years ago, Kmart, 30 years ago,
including every mom and pop out there.
Right, 30 years ago, Kmart was the bad guy because they were putting out the mom and pops, and now the Kmarts are gone because Target came through and Walmart came through. It used to be, remember Kmart and Gemco and all those, and Woolworths and all those places that put out the little guy and those guys. Eventually, and all of them, by the way, all of them started out as little guys who provided a service. Or provided a product that was better than their competitors, and people bought and paid from them. They became these giant, oh gosh, they're monopolies. Nobody can ever topple them. Tell that to Kmart. Tell that to Gemco. Tell that to Ardance. Tell that in 10 years. Tell that to Walmart. The market works, and the market will bring down when things get, when somebody gets so big that it's going to be a monopoly. You think of all the monopolies from the 20s and the 30s and the 40s and all these companies. You think of Pan Am, you think of IBM, you think of all these giants.
Yeah.
You think of all these giants that tried to be monopolies.
Mm-hmm.
Where are they now?
Mm-hmm.
The market took care of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would add, before we get back on track with socialism itself, I would add that a private corporation can trample your rights just as quickly and efficiently as a central government can.
Not without the central government.
Well,
Not
when
with
they hijack the central
not,
government.
Right, not without. No.
Then
No. It's again, we've had this discussion before. The corporation is only as powerful as the government is.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's a powerful government, then the corporation can hijack the powerful government.
Okay,
if
so
it's not a powerful government, there's nothing for the corporation to hijack, and they cannot do to you. Corporations can never do to you what a government can. Never. The only time they have the power to do that is because they've gotten into the government and they make the government do it. But corporations themselves cannot ever do to you what a government can.
Well,
Without the help of a corrupt government.
have you heard about the Ludlow massacre?
Tell me about it.
Okay, so on April 20th, 1914,
Yep.
a private corporation called in the Colorado National Guard.
Stop right there. Called in the government forces.
Uh-huh.
That's what I'm saying. It was the government forces that did it. Without the powerful government and corrupt government, that corporation had no power. Could not do that massacre. It was government doing the bidding of a corporation, but the corporation needed a corrupt government to do it. The
Okay.
problem isn't the corporation. The problem is the corrupt government.
Okay.
Fix the corrupt government. That's always the problem. And the bigger you make your government, the more powerful you make your government, the more power you're handing to the corporations. That will always be that will always be the problem. You keep wanting to put down and take the power away from the corporations by making the government bigger, and the government will always be the bigger problem. You're making the problem bigger.
So how do you solve that problem then? Because we've seen that corporations repeatedly throughout history
You
will
limit the size of
follow
your
their
government.
profits.
You limit
and
the
they will
size
put
of your
profits
government.
over the lives of
You
people.
limit the size of your government.
I mean, look at what happened, the Bhopal incident in India, right? Where thousands of people died in their sleep because of a chemical leak, a toxic chemical leak that killed thousands of people. And what do? That's what happens when you have strong corporations and weak government. You get all kinds of problems. So I think what you really need is
When you have strong governments, you get atrocities.
you get problems with both.
Yeah, but you get
So
way
what's
you
the
get way
solution?
more problems
Okay.
with bigger government.
Sure,
So shrink
sure.
so shrink the size of government.
Okay, but
Shrink
do
the
you
size
really
of government.
think
Shrink the
that's
power of government. Absolutely. You just said it right now. You know that's the bigger problem.
okay?
That large governments pose a much bigger problem than large corporations.
Okay, so you shrink the government. How far do you shrink it
As far as you can before anarchy.
before anarchy?
You do
so,
not ever let it go to anarchy, but you shrink it as far as you can.
So
That
what
the
does-
Constitution
what
should
does the
always
government do?
Constitution should always be a set of negative what is it? Negative rights.
Negative rights.
Yeah, should always be what the government cannot do to you,
Okay, so
and
we've-
that list should be as long as possible.
okay, so how do you prevent us from turning into Somalia? Anarchy. How do you prevent anarchy?
You don't
What
allow
does
no
the government actually do in your end game? So Scott, you're king of the world. Whatever you can do, whatever you want. You are able to implement your ideas. What does the government do under your system?
That's kind of the opposite of what
I get it. I know
Yeah,
you're able to wave a magic wand.
Able to wave a
However,
magic wand. The laws of the government should constantly be what the government cannot do to you. That should always be the focus of the law. The government cannot do this.
how do you protect people?
It's not the government's. Well,
What is the government's job? To do nothing?
no, the government's job. Yeah, almost. The government's job is to protect you from someone taking your life, taking your property, protect your life, liberty, and property.
Okay.
Liberty.
And
Being
how
a big
do
one.
they do that? How do they carry that out? They're going to need coercive power. The state
Yes.
has to have coercive power.
Absolutely.
Okay? And so basically the state will exercise that power whenever a private corporation harms people.
Now you have to define harms. Yes.
Well, harms. For example, you cheat people. You cause an accident. You cause people to lose life or property, right?
Yeah, because the people can still sue
Mm-hmm.
and still prove liability.
Okay,
And
so
then-
now we've added, a whole judicial branch and all of that, right? So
Well,
the
no, there
government
still should
is
be
needed to resolve disputes, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay.
There's a judicial branch. There's an executive branch. There's a congressional branch
so who
that they still
provides
makes
the
laws.
roads? Who provides the infrastructure?
That's taxes.
Well, yeah, I get taxes. Okay, so now the government has to levy taxes. This is good. Now
All this is still established at the beginning of the
who
Constitution of the United
establishes
States.
standards like standard gauges for railroads, standard widths of roads and streets? What about sanitation? What about infrastructure? Does the government also provide education, or is that left to the whims of private corporations?
I believe I believe in private education.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so no more public schools. Sorry, folks. You got to pay the private education in order to have kids who are literate.
And save money.
Oh, yes. I'd rather have money than a kid who can read.
No, I'm saying save money by sending them to private school than to public school.
Okay, well, we could argue that one out, right?
Yeah.
It works for poor people, huh? So what about infrastructure? Who provides the infrastructure? Because prior to having a strong central federal government, for example, we had railroads with all these different gauges.
Yep.
And trains could not go on other tracks, and it created this whole mess up until around the time of the Civil War, when we realized, oh my gosh, we need to have a standard gauge for trains, and we need to, so that they can go on one track than the other, regardless of the corporation that owns those tracks.
Okay. So you want right now this discussion to become me describing every single law that the government should do.
Well, what I'm trying to tell you is that you need a government to do a lot of different things, and it's not simply to protect people from harm. A government is the practical way to ensure that people have their needs taken care of. For example, infrastructure. How else do you build a transcontinental railroad unless you have a government? How do you build a space program unless you have a government?
I don't know.
At
Ask
least initially.
SpaceX.
Well, SpaceX inherited a lot of knowledge and everything from NASA. They did not invent, all of the knowledge that went into sending people to the moon. But because that was public knowledge, NASA being a government corporation, they're actually required to share their information and knowledge with the public.
And most of the technology was from private companies.
Contracted, but the government also pioneered a lot of its own. But the bottom line is,
it was private companies.
NASA is a government organization. NASA invented and developed a lot of stuff. You remember Jet Propulsion Laboratory? Did a lot of research there, things like that. And the bottom line is that information then is essentially shared with the public. Usually there's after a period, depending on whatever concerns the government may have, like strategic concerns. But then the public is then able to make use of that knowledge and information and then build upon it. So there are a lot of benefits that comes from government. Government is not all or inherently bad. But we've really gotten off the topic of socialism because now we're talking about libertarianism or something like that. I want to get back to socialism because that's what I promised people we would talk about today.
I bet you do.
And socialism is this. This is how you define socialism.
Okay.
Socialism is a system of government where the means of production are controlled, owned and controlled by the people who work those means of production, by the laborers or by the people.
Define
and they are worked for the benefit of the people.
So when I start a company, the purpose of my company is to benefit the workers.
When the workers or when the workers start a company, when the workers
because workers always start their own companies.
Sure they do.
No, I mean it happens, but I'm just saying, a company is started from an entrepreneur who hires workers. The workers didn't start the company.
And
the
that's
entrepreneur
fine.
started.
I have
the
no
company.
problem with entrepreneurs.
That's how business is made.
Okay, I have no problem with that.
Right. So, but what you have a problem with is if they make too much money.
Well, if they make too much money by basically committing theft of labor, if they steal labor,
How are they stealing labor?
If they
What's your
change
definition
the tax
of
law to benefit them, but then they pass the taxes on to you and I, and so on.
Okay, so that's tax. That's tax law stuff. I'm just saying, how much money should a company make, percentage wise, before it's too much?
I don't think you can throw out an answer to that.
I know you cannot. But,
okay.
But socialism would aim to do that.
No, what
to
socialism...
say the workers have to have this much. It has to benefit the workers. Well, then you have to be able to define how much is now a benefit and how much is too much. So there is so socialism demands that there has to be a line to which you cannot make more than this because now you're hurting the workers. You have to be able to define it.
No, you're not hurting the workers by making a lot of money. You hurt the workers by not paying them the fair value of their labor.
What is the fair value of their labor?
Well, what does a worker need to have a decent living?
Why is that the definition of it?
Well, because we're dealing with human beings.
Okay.
We're not dealing with robots or automatons. Human beings have needs. Human beings deserve dignity. They deserve respect. They deserve certain things. We oftentimes call these things human rights. We call them a standard of living, a quality of life. And in my personal belief...
Hold on. Who defines that?
Well, the people should define that. And in my personal belief...
So the person defines this is what my level of dignity should be.
No, society would dictate that. Society will determine that, for example, we've done this before. When the minimum wage was first established, Roosevelt explained very clearly that the purpose of the minimum wage was to provide a dignified living for all workers. So they would have no dependency upon the government.
And that has worked so well.
Well, it worked great initially. It was incredibly popular.
Socialism always works great.
They re-elected FDR 3 times.
So does the Ponzi scheme. A Ponzi scheme and a pyramid scheme works great at the very beginning. It always works great at the very beginning and suckers so many people.
Yeah, they had to pass a law to prevent FDR from winning more elections. Actually, then he passed away. But the way this works is the means of production are managed for the benefit of society. They're not managed for the benefit of a few individual shareholders whose only purpose in existence is to extract as much wealth as they can from human labor.
Okay.
Because you actually get to a
What's
situation...
the side effect of that?
What's the side effect of what?
What's the byproduct of companies trying to be successful?
Right there. You have so much surplus wealth, they are then able to purchase media corporations.
So you don't shop at Apple, you don't take advantage of Google, you don't buy Coca-Cola, you don't ever eat at McDonald's. You don't benefit from the innovations that these companies create by trying to be better than their competition? You don't benefit from that? You don't benefit from that? I'm sorry, where's your iPhone? Where's your iPad? You don't benefit?
Right? No, I think we do benefit, but the problem is
the
workers
only reason
are
you
exploited.
benefit. The only reason you benefit is because the purpose of the business is to make money, not the purpose of the business to take care of the people. If the purpose of the business was to take care of the people, everything would always stay the status quo. There's no innovation.
Okay.
That's why the socialist companies, not companies, but it doesn't work. There's so many places that are leaving socialism, so many societies right now that are turning away from socialism, that have had socialism in Europe and South America, that have had socialism, that the people are tired of it and they're not voting for it anymore. Mm-hmm.
Well,
they've realized what is wrong with the system. They realize the system doesn't work. For some reason, Americans haven't figured that out. Americans who've never really experienced socialism the way that it is out there are like, this is the greatest savior for mankind. It's all about the workers and And all the countries that the people and the workers have lived in, these socialist countries, the people are no longer voting for it.
Well, do you think capitalism is actually working? When you take a look at the planet and the environment, you take a look at oceans that are full of plastic. You take a look at the air, which is full of pollutants. You take a look at water, which isn't clean. Capitalism isn't fixing any of those problems. We have all kinds of issues and social ills in this country, and the relentless pursuit of profit is making people at the very top a lot more wealthy, while the rest of us here are slowly watching our standard of living decline.
Watching our standard of living decline?
Yes, the working class in America.
How many people had air conditioning in their homes 50 years ago?
I don't.
How many people drove new cars 50 years ago? How many people had computers in their pockets 20 years ago?
Okay, but the problem is...
Our standard, everybody's standard, the standard of living of my kids is well above the standard of living that I had growing up and you had growing up, that the average American had growing up in the 80s. The standard of living for most people is on the rise.
I disagree with that. Take a look at our health care, which is actually the most expensive health care in the world, and we have lower health outcomes compared to what they have, for example, in the Nordic countries where they have social democracy. And you take a look at the fact that socialized healthcare has been adopted by every country on the planet except for the United States.
And most of those countries, the people are turning away from socialism.
No, they are not.
Yes, they are.
No, they are not.
Yes, they are.
Okay, so where's your data to support that claim?
So 2018 EU.
Because
the
unfettered
Netherlands,
capitalism is
the
bad
Netherlands,
for the
the
planet.
Labour
and
Party has captured only 5.7% of the votes in the last election. French Socialist Party candidate won only 6.4%. This party went on to receive a miserable 9.5% of the vote.
that
Right,
doesn't mean
these
they're
are
turning away from socialism. You have to understand, these are not two-party systems like we have here in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
They have multiple parties. There's even Christian social democracy. There are Christian socialists. And so...
But
just
it's on the
because-
decline in places where
I don't know
by
that
the
that's
people.
on the decline. And what are they
not
going
by
to do?
the governments. They're voting in less of these people. More conservatives are being voted in.
Okay, well, maybe conservatism means socialism. Because conservative means
Oh, so you can
preferring-
change the definition of the word so it fits your argument.
Well, look at what China's done, right? China used to hold up Mao Zedong, and because he was a revolutionary, and then all of a sudden, they started teaching Edmund Burke in their universities and schools. They quit reading Mao because Mao was considered radical, and they became conservative. But conservative doesn't mean they're doing away with communism. Conservative means they're actually preserving the old system, because now communism, which was once a new system under Mao, is now the old system. And so conservative doesn't necessarily
Because
mean
they've gone more to
that you're going to a liberal economic system, which is like libertarianism.
Mhm.
It doesn't mean that you're turning that direction. Conservative means that you're entrenching in the old ways, the old systems, the old values. And those could be socialist values and socialist systems.
Okay. Conservatism is socialism in Europe, I guess.
It may be. It may very well be. And it could be here, right? If the United States were to become socialist, at first it would be radical. And then over time, what was radical then becomes mainstream and becomes normal and becomes the old way. And if you support the old way, you are then a conservative.
No,
versus
it's
a
somebody.
liberal.
It's somebody redefining. It's China redefining what conservatism
No, this is
It's
how
China.
systems work. Okay? The founding fathers today would be considered conservatives, but in their age, they were considered radical liberals.
No, the reason they're conservative, they wouldn't. They're not conservative at all. They created a system, and conservatives are people who believe in that system. It was
Exactly.
it was the beginning
Exactly.
of that system.
You're proving my point.
Yeah, it's the beginning of
Mhm.
that system.
At the time, they were considered liberals. In fact, they were called liberals.
Right, but
And they were radicals.
but they changed the system. They didn't just rename the system and
Right.
say we're now going to be conservative to keep this system that we've always had. They changed it to a new system.
Well,
The
now
way
we're
you're-
arguing
the-
semantics.
Exactly, but that's what you were saying. You were trying to use
Mm-hmm.
the word that China is saying. China didn't change the system. They just said, well, now we don't want to be radical anymore, so we're going to say that this system is now what we're aiming for, not changing the system. Whereas the radicals in the United States, the radicals in the colonies, changed the system. And
If
conservatives now you're trying to say that someday conservatives are going to be people who want socialism in America. But that's not what a conservative American wants. A
Not
conservative
today.
American.
No, not at present.
Not ever.
Today, a conservative American is a different animal. But if the liberals, if the United States becomes a socialist state, if you will, and I would argue that we already are, by the way, but if the United States becomes a socialist state, then in 100 years, the people who favor the preservation, the maintenance of that state, would be the conservatives of that age. Does that make sense? And the people who favor change would be the liberals of that age.
I guess.
That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying that conservatives are secretly socialists or anything like that.
No, but I'm saying conservatives are conservatives because we want it the way that it was from the beginning.
And at one time in the beginning, it was radical liberalism. The idea of a free market without government intrusion
Right, but I'm just saying.
was at one time a radical liberal idea. Today, it is considered conservative because it is now the old mainstream idea.
Okay. We're not communicating right now.
I guess we're not.
I'm saying a system is established.
Uh-huh.
I don't care what the system is. It's established.
Yes.
And then conservatives want to maintain that system.
That's what a conservative is by definition.
Yes.
And it does not matter what
Yes.
the system is.
Right, but it does. It does matter that this is the original system. That's what conservatives want, is the original system.
What do you mean by original? Nothing's original.
The Constitution of the United States is an
Okay,
original
so
system.
now you're talking specifically about the United
Yes,
States.
I am talking specific. That's what I said. American
talking about-
conservatives.
well,
I
I'm
said
speaking in
American
general.
conservatives talking specific. This whole
Okay.
conversation has been American conservatives talking specifically about
Okay, American conservatives want to preserve the original system that
of the
was
Constitution
liberal.
of the United States.
That was liberal when
That's fine.
held
I don't
in
ca-
contrast
I don't
to
care
the
about
old
that.
system, the old monarchy,
That's
the
fine.
English absolute monarchy.
That's fine. So that's
which
just,
is not an absolute, is parliamentary.
anyway. So
but-
that's the system. What I'm saying is that system would have to be changed
Mhm.
to become the norm.
Mhm.
That literally would have to be rewritten. The Constitution of the United States has been either rewritten or abolished, and a new system brought in for us to say, okay, we are now liberals because we don't want this old system here.
Mhm.
Conservatives always want, United States conservatives want constitutionalism.
So do you disagree? Do you disagree then that the means of production should be, and that government in general should answer to the people?
I believe that government in general should answer to the people. I do not believe that government should force businesses to answer to the people, because you will always have stagnant growth in business.
What if there was a reasonable limitation on that?
There always
Be-
has to
because
be.
how-
There always has to
Right,
be. I
exactly.
understand that.
Okay,
But
there
I
we go.
believe what you're wanting is unreasonable.
Why? What am I wanting?
You tell me.
Well, wait. You said it was unreasonable, so you must know what I want. What do I want?
You want companies to pay a certain wage
Mhm.
that will be defined by whoever,
By society.
by society. You want government to provide for the people health care, benefits, pay. You've talked about that you're in
Universal
agreement.
basic
Universal
income.
basic income.
I generally believe that there should be a floor beneath which we do not let people fall. I would like to see private corporations
and I
pay
believe
workers.
that's too far.
I would like to believe. I understand. I would like to see private corporations pay workers. I'd like to see businesses pay workers enough that those workers no longer qualify for welfare benefits.
And they
Because you
would. Here's the
understand-
problem. Here's the problem. And this is the problem. The reason they get away with it is because the welfare benefits are there.
What are you talking about? Who is they? Who is we?
The people accept the wages. The people accept the
Because
wages
the welfare benefits
because the welfare
subsidize them.
because the welfare benefits subsidize. If
I
the
agree.
welfare benefits weren't there, the people would demand more and they would have to be paid more.
I agree with that. I agree with that.
But your answer is to give away more.
Yeah, I don't
is
want
to give away
I don't want
more,
to threaten a
which
person
which
with
do-
starvation because
which doesn't fix the problem. You want to fix the problem. You want corporations.
I want to fix the problem by
No.
demanding that corporations
You
pay
want
a
to
living wage to workers.
artificially fix the problem, which never fixes the problem. Artificial interference, whether you are artificially controlling wages or artificially controlling prices, whenever somebody like government steps in to artificially control one portion of the market, it always fails. It always
Well, that's
messes
not
it up.
true
It
across
always
most
messes
of
it
Europe.
up.
It's not true in Australia. It's not true in many of these social democracies around
Like
the world.
like Greece
where
and
workers
Venezuela
are-
and France.
No, those are socialist, but they are not all the same. Socialism is a spectrum, and on one end you have very radical socialism like communism, where either you're going to toe the line or you're going to the gulag. And very few people actually support that kind of socialism. There are some out there, but they are pretty much on the extreme left, and they're considered radical by most socialists even. And then you have various degrees. You get to social democracy, I'm fairly close to the middle on the spectrum of socialism. And then you get to the middle, and it's no longer
The
socialism.
people on the left really like to consider themselves in the middle. They never really like to see themselves as extremists.
Well,
It's funny. Conservatives have no problem saying they're conservatives.
what are libertarians?
They're extremists. Conservatives are. I have no problem saying I'm an extremist. I'm on the right. I just find it funny that most liberals don't like saying they're on the left. They like to say they're in the
Well,
middle.
because the left is the gulag. The left is Soviet goose-stepping gulags.
No.
Yeah, it is.
No.
That's the extreme left.
Well, I mean, there's I don't mind being called right, and I understand there's an
extreme right. It's called fascism, which is called Nazis, National Socialists. Which,
Right,
despite
which
the
would-
word use
no,
of the word
no,
socialist,
no.
they're not socialists.
Yeah,
They are not socialists.
it's the
They're
National
fascists.
Socialist Party.
I know.
Fascism is on the same side as socialism. It's way
No,
over there.
No, it is not.
Yes,
it is
it
an
is.
extreme right philosophy.
It is not.
Really?
It's
Really?
socialism.
No, just because you put something in your name doesn't mean that's what it is. It is not socialism. The Nazi Party is the quintessential example of extreme right-wing fascism, where you have an alliance between government and private corporations and the people be damned. That is fascism. Nazism is not socialism. Even though it was called National Socialism, it was not socialism.
Why you get to determine? Why you get to change?
Well,
the
no,
names
look
of
on
everything?
any political spectrum. Any political spectrum. And you will see fascism is on the far right. Communism is on the far left. I'll show this also to the camera. I don't think the camera can really see it. I'll have to probably post this in the comments. But that's Nazis, communists. And here we are. So there you are, libertarianism on the right, to the right of conservatism. There I am on the left of liberalism.
But you call yourself middle.
I think I'm between liberalism and socialism, but
But
yes.
you call yourself middle.
Okay,
You're not.
maybe I'm wrong then. Maybe I am on the radical left. I'm certainly advocating and agitating for change. So if that makes me a radical, then okay, I'm a radical.
I have no problem being labeled a right-wing conservative.
Okay.
But
Good.
why do liberals have a problem being labeled left-wing liberals? They want to be called middle.
I don't know.
They
I
wanna
don't
be
speak
called
for
normal.
I don't speak for all
Why
liberals.
did you want to be called middle?
Because I feel that's more reasonable. That's where I belong. I'm certainly not advocating for the arrest, detention, re-education,
You see
and
yourself as
execution
you,
of people
you
who
see
disagree with
you
me.
see yourself as normal.
Yeah, I think it is becoming normal. I think the entire nation is moving to the left.
So that proves my point. You're really over here on the left, but you see yourself as normal in the middle.
Okay.
Why are most liberals that way?
Because most people tend to see themselves as normal.
Most conservatives don't. We have no problem saying we're conservative and on the right.
Okay.
We're just more honest, I guess,
So,
with ourselves.
okay, maybe so. I don't know. But as a socialist, I mean, socialists are certainly idealists, you know, and they tend to...
Utopian, which
yeah.
by definition is unattainable.
Well, the problem is, and I think that people on libertarians...
Conservatives are realists.
I think libertarians and communists both suffer from the same problem, which is that I think both of them assume that human beings are rational and benevolent on some level. That even though they're individual bad actors, that by and large, society is rational and somewhat benevolent, and as a consequence will discipline the bad actors. Then how do you solve for a bad actor in libertarianism? If a person is bad, how do you handle that?
When they violate someone else's life, liberty, or property, then you punish them.
What if a whole segment of society, or what if the majority goes along with it?
Doesn't matter if you're violating someone's life, liberty, or property. That person should be punished.
What if the majority thinks what if the majority's cool with it? You know, it's
That-
called slavery, segregation, apartheid, whatever.
That's why the government has to protect life, liberty, property.
So I actually think we're a lot closer together than you think, because even though I am on the left, I do believe there should be what I call frank exceptions. There should be a Bill of Rights. And I think the Bill of Rights is one of the greatest inventions in
As long as it's
ever.
As long as it's negative liberties.
More or less. I do think that people should have rights to things like food, shelter, health care, education, and so on. That's me. That's where I differ from you. But generally speaking, I do believe there should be frank exceptions. And so in general, in my thought, I am of the belief that the needs of society should outweigh the preferences of the individual, except when dealing with frank exceptions. So things like freedom of speech.
That's always going to lead to problems. That's always going to lead to tyranny.
Well, I think
the
that's
focus,
a hasty
the focus should always be individual liberty.
But
to
would
protect
not
individual
radical
liberty.
libertarianism also lead to tyranny? Just a different one. You're trading, you know, the tyranny of a central government for the tyranny of a corporation whose only interest is profit.
No.
Profit isn't about people.
As long
Profit
as
is about
as long
profit.
as the government is protecting individual liberty. Now, if we want to call a company an individual, I think that's up for debate. So, but I believe individual liberty should be individual liberty should always be the focus of government instead of collective good.
So what
Because collective good will always lead to what you were talking about, which is, well, as long as the majority of the people say this is okay, that's the collective good.
No, there's frank exceptions. That's the Bill of Rights.
That's okay. That's fine. So you make these frank exceptions that you always have to. Oh, well, then we have to add this exception because people are going to go around it. Oh, you have to add this
society
exception
changes.
because
250
no,
years
I'm not
ago,
talking about
there
changes.
was
I'm
no
talking about
such thing as
loopholes.
universal health care.
No, I'm not talking about changes in the zeitgeist. I'm talking about simple loopholes. Simple loopholes. You write this law.
Like
and it's
these guys take advantage of all the time to
yeah,
hijack
but
our
what I'm
government?
right, but what I'm talking about is you trying to say that the way to do government is to have it this way to protect these, except for these frank exceptions that we're going to line out that you can't do this. There will always be ways to get around those exceptions. So then if you
Will there be?
So don't guide your law saying we're going to do the greater good with these exceptions. Guide your law saying we're going to protect individual liberty. And that will always help the people. Protecting individual liberty will always help the people. Protecting the good of the people will always lead to tyranny. Because the good, you can do all atrocities you want as long as it's for the good of the people.
But
if your government is set up to protect individual liberty, their government will always be stopped by itself, by its
what
laws.
about my individual liberty to get as filthy rich as I want?
As long as you don't violate my life, liberty, or property. If you're not actually breaking into my house and stealing my money and grabbing my kids and forcing them into labor, what business is it of mine?
So what if I basically buy out the entire government? My voice is the only voice that's heard.
Okay, so now you're back to it's the government. If the government was set up to protect individual liberties and it cannot be corrupted in that way, then you couldn't buy out the government. But if the government is set to take care of the good of the people, then you have a powerful government that can be corrupted.
So do you disagree?
It's the government.
Do you disagree with what's happening here?
Yes,
in
of
the
course.
Status quo.
Yes, of course.
So you don't believe that corporations should have a free hand to buy out government?
No, of course not.
Okay. So
But it is the government that allows that. So we need to make sure the government cannot let that happen.
So what would you do? Would you take a pair of scissors to the Constitution?
In what way?
I don't know, reduce it to just the Bill of Rights.
No, I think the Constitution, as it started off, that wasn't the problem. It's all these other laws that have been added since then. The actual Constitution, there's nothing to cut out of the actual Constitution.
So you like the original Constitution. So if I hear you right, you want to go back to 1789 or 93 or whatever it was to is that what you want to do?
No, the Constitution, even as it's edited, it's not the constitutional problems. It's the powers that are acting outside of the Constitution.
You understand what precedent is?
Yes.
Okay. So the Constitution's written. It's somewhat vague, correct? You would agree with that. Over time, disputes arise because it's vague. People have to interpret it, and we have to solve the dispute. The judicial branch resolves the dispute, says it means this, but not this. And then people accuse the judicial branch, which is merely doing its job of legislating from the bench because they don't like the decision. But every time the judicial branch sets a precedent by making a ruling, they're essentially creating another layer of law or complexity. They're basically rendering an interpretation. Likewise, the executive, the president, has the same authority. The president has the law and says, I'm going to interpret the law to mean this. This is how we will enforce the law. A person can challenge that, take it to the courts, and the courts can either side with the president or the executive or not. But that's how it works. So every time this happens over 200 years or so, you end up with the enormous complexity that we have today. Of course, you add to it what these guys have been doing to it, and now it becomes absolutely burdensome. But systems inherently become more complex over time until they break down.
Maybe it would be good if if there was a limitation on the verbiage of laws.
Okay, I mean, that's an idea. I don't have time to sit and think about that at this instant. It is something that we should think about.
Similar to term limits. Like, absolutely there should be term limits. If there's anything that will fix most of this problem, it's going to be term limits. If there was anything that's going to fix this, the very first thing that we could do.
That you recognize that this is happening.
Yes, I just don't agree with your solution.
You don't agree with it.
Your solution, you call this socialism for the rich, and it's bad. So your solution is to bring more socialism.
Because you realize this costs you, right?
Yes, but I'm saying
You
your
realize what these
solution.
people are doing. They're
But
taking
your
the lion's
solution
share
is
of
your
tax
solution
revenue
is
and other
dumb.
things.
But your solution is dumb. Your solution is more of that.
No, it's
Yes.
it's the
No,
opposite.
but it's more of that. It will lead to, it doesn't solve that. It
No,
doesn't
it's
fix that.
it's take this and hand it to the people. Hand control of this back to the people is
But
my
you can't
solution.
define how to do that.
What do you mean I can't define? Sure we can. You pass reforms to get these guys out of Washington, D.C., and you have the people's voice alone.
How? You've not answered that. You have not answered that.
Term limits is one way to do it. Another way to do it is to outlaw unlimited finance, unlimited, all these contributions that these
That's
people
fine.
make.
That's still not making us socialist.
Okay, you redefine corporate personhood by either eliminating altogether.
Okay, that's still not
or
making us
limiting it.
socialist.
Well, at that once you
So you're still not
remove
calling
the
for social-
corporations and their moneyed influence from government, now the people's voice determines what laws are made and what happens.
Okay.
That's social democracy.
That's
Because
simply a
the
republic.
people-
No, that's simply a republic.
No, because
Yes,
well,
that's
okay,
simply a republic.
The people are going to
What you're
then
calling for is a
demand-
republic.
Reasonably, the people should demand that the tax revenues collected by the government should be spent on their own self-interest. It should be spent on things like education, healthcare, roads, so
Fine,
on.
that's still a republic.
You're right. It is possible under a Republican form of government. Absolutely.
Then let's do
And
that.
social democracies are Republican forms of government where people elect representatives and the representatives speak on their behalf.
That's a republic.
That
That's
is
what we
a
want.
republic.
Let's make it a republic,
Hmm.
as it should be, a republic. If you can keep it that way, let's keep it a republic.
Then what happens, though, if the people say we want to establish a minimum wage for all workers in society?
That's not. That's not.
Or maybe they say we want
That's
to get
not
away.
within the power. Again, now you're making a bigger government and you're creating another problem.
Or what if people
Now that
say
now that you're going to allow the government to artificially control part of the market, that's going to cause a bigger problem.
what if people say we want to get
take
rid
the
of
corporation
the minimum
out of the
wage?
government. Take the corporation out of government. Make government smaller. Don't go farther than that. When you start going farther than that, that's when you start creating bigger problems. You make that government bigger and bigger, that government will tyrannize you.
What if the people say we want to do away with minimum wage, but we want to create collective bargaining laws that require corporations to collectively bargain with all workers, and as a consequence, those collective bargaining agreements must be enforced by the government?
If you want to make your union and everybody believes in that, if you have enough people to believe in that union so that you privately create that union and you get all of the workers to be part of that union and to unionize and say, this is what we will do together, then you'll make that corporation have to do what you want to do. But if you are setting it to where every corporation has to be a union, now you are artificially by law shifting the balance that's going to make the market crash.
How do you prevent corporations then from taking advantage of their wealth versus the wealth of the individuals, which is actually quite small? Because the problem is, the reason people form a union is because there's this terrible disparity in power between a moneyed corporation and an individual worker. And not only do they do this, I mean, they suppress wages in a variety of ways. And one of the ways they do that is they actually deter or prevent unionization. Any kind of collectivization activity in a workplace
You get fired.
is a big, you get fired,
Okay.
you get punished. So should we not pass a law preventing
If
that from
enough
happening?
if enough people stop working, they'll have to do something.
Okay, but the problem is, do you have any idea how hard? I mean, holy cow, it's hard enough to get a family to get in the car to leave to go somewhere at the same time.
Yeah.
Furthermore, hundreds, if not thousands, of workers in a factory all moving together in the same direction.
But
And when every person is mortally terrified of losing their job because there's no more safety net under your system of government, these people are not going to unionize. They're going to realize if I try to unionize, I'm going to lose my job. There's no safety net in Scott's America. I'm going to starve. I'd better just go ahead and shut up and work for the lower wages.
I think the market fixes it. I think anytime you artificially put a finger into the market, you cause more problems.
Is it not possible to artificially put a finger on the market but not a whole fist? Couldn't you just put couldn't you use some kind of measured correction as opposed to this? Why not this? If we know that this is okay and this is enough, I mean, why is it always a slippery slope fallacy that this equals this eventually? Why does that have to happen?
Because it will.
But
You
what
know
if it doesn't? What if we
It does. It will.
Okay, so if everything's a slippery
That's
slope,
human nature.
Okay, so if that's human nature, then wouldn't your system of government also end up in this, just on the other side of the equation? If everything is a slippery slope, every time we do this, it will eventually end in this, whether it's to the right or to the left of the scale. What do we do then?
I would rather end up on the side of the scale that protects individual liberty than protects collective
This protects no individual liberty. This crushes us both. On the left, it crushes us on the right.
How does it crush us on the right?
Well, again, like I've said, a private corporation can trample your rights just the same as a government.
And you're wrong.
And there are many examples of this happening.
All examples of them taking advantage of the government. It's always the government that does it. You know that. You know that. Their power is in the corrupt government.
No,
The power is in, they don't have their own
okay, so
armies.
when you have
They
a
don't-
bridge that collapses because it's poorly built, when you have products that poison consumers, that's a
Then-
private corporation. Where's the government in that equation? It's not.
Yes,
that's the problem.
that's where the lawsuit happens. That's where liability
Really?
happens.
So we have
Yes.
to wait for enough people to die to go ahead and say, oh, well, I guess
so
we need
you'd
a lawsuit.
rather preemptively punish people before something goes wrong.
No, I want to preemptively prevent people from doing things that are going to cause harm. I want to preempt harm.
You can't.
Yes, you can. You say, for example, we're going to have a law where we're going to inspect meats. Look at the packing plants that I think it was Upton Sinclair, I could be wrong on the author, wrote about the meat packing plants in Chicago, how awful they were because there was no government regulation. They were not only awful for workers, they were awful for consumers. People were being fed perfumed hams that looked and relatively tasted delicious, but they were actually horrible for their health. They were molded. They were bad meat. It made people sick. It killed people. People got food poisoning. And until the government came in to deal with this, the free market had no answer.
Right. So that is where what the government, what the corporation was doing was actually lying and wronging people, taking good money for bad product. So they were actually doing something in that moment that was punishable.
But the
So punish
solution,
them.
right? But the solution isn't just to punish. You can punish.
Yeah, the solution
But the
is to
solution
punish.
is to create the USDA and
The
have
solu-
meat
the-
inspected.
The solution is to have a big enough punishment to where the company takes care of that.
But what prevents
If they
another company
violate it-
from going on behind them and doing it? Look at all these Superfund sites we have around the country. That's another example. The corporations can be punished, but even when they're punished, they're not punished in such a way as to deter that behavior from occurring again.
Then they're not punished hard enough. Make it a punishment.
But isn't it easier to simply outlaw pollution? It's against the law. Don't even try it. Don't do it, and then we'll slap a fine on you, because when you fine people for things, it just means it's legal for rich people. That's what a fine is. A fine equals legal for rich people.
Yeah, because then you make the fine higher.
Or the punishment more severe, right?
Make the punishment
Which
more
increases
severe.
the coercive power of the state. But you're okay with that if it's a punishment, yeah?
It's a punishment when if this is a law that if you're harming someone, then there should be punishment for that.
But shouldn't we have systems in place that prevent the harm from occurring in the first place? Isn't that better?
No.
Well, I disagree. I would rather the harm be prevented rather than wait to get sick and then have to worry about punishing and suing. I would rather never get sick in the first place. But that's me.
You'd rather be safe in a bubble.
To a degree. Again, this,
You'd
not
rather-
this.
you'd rather be safe in a
This,
bubble.
not this. And I think being human beings with the capacity for reason and intellect, we can make sure we stay here and don't somehow
The
devolve
only way
into
you can
this.
make sure to stay there is that you are constantly, if you design the system to not be able to do that except in an exception, which means protect individual liberty, and then you protect individual liberty, and then these are the times where you have to step in. And
But
do
that's
this.
going to mean a bigger government.
Yeah, but not nearly as big of a government as a government that says our purpose is to take care of the greater good of people, except for these exceptions to where we do have to
So
do these
would you-
punishments.
would
So
you
you have a
eliminate-
much greater government and a much greater possibility of government being corrupt if the goal of the government is for the greater good of the populace instead of protecting individual liberty. Then you will always have too big of a government with too much power that will always become this fist.
Would you eliminate
here.
the USDA?
I would rather have
You don't want your meat inspected by the government, then you're going to
I'd
trust
rather-
a private corporation to do it.
I would trust a, yeah,
Wow. All
if
right.
the punishment was big enough.
If the punishment was big enough, you'll
For
go
the-
ahead and roll those dice.
If the punishment was big enough,
Do you think
the,
people
the
who
punishment
live
of
in the
litigation was big enough.
democracies of, let's say, Sweden, Finland, Norway, do you think they feel like they're under some kind of a fist?
They don't know the difference.
They don't know the difference. So do you think those people feel oppressed? Are they being oppressed, in your opinion?
I believe to an extent, yes.
Okay.
But they don't know it because that's what they've always lived under. What I'm talking about is America has had a freedom, and I don't want to lose that freedom. We have had a liberty, a freedom and a liberty that other countries have not experienced in the same way that I feel is now being limited to be more like those other countries that never experienced the freedom. That's what I don't want. I want a government that's going to protect my individual liberty, not a government that's going to make sure that the greater good is better for everyone. Because that means in order for the greater good to be better for everyone, other people have to be pulled down to that level.
And I think that's reasonable as long as it's within reason. I don't believe you should do it to excess, and that's why I think you should have a Bill of Rights and so on. But I do not believe the greater good should be sacrificed for a single individual to become a multi-billionaire or trillionaire. I think that's ridiculous. If we can redistribute some, even a fraction of that wealth to the people and substantially increase the
To
standard
the people
of
who
living for
did
all people.
nothing to earn it.
Oh, I don't know
Wow.
about that. That's a whole nother discussion. But the fact that you live in a society, you benefit from a society, you benefit from all the educated workers and the people who consume your product, I think you owe a little something to that society, in my opinion.
I want a government that's going to protect my individual liberty.
I want that too, and I don't think they're both exclusive.
Well, this has been a valid answer. Talking about what we thought was socialism, I think we got there a little bit.
Yeah, we talked about it. It was sort of, we meandered a bit.
Yeah.
A little less structured than normal, but, hey, that's how it works when you discuss ideas. Sometimes the conversation meanders and you end up talking about things that you might not have planned to talk about, but they're still worthy
At
ideas.
least we're still talking.
At least we are still talking.
And we're still hanging out and still going to each other's houses and playing board games and not at each other's throats, despite how differently we view the world.
And
So
I
this
want
is-
to encourage you to do the same out there too.
So this has been a valid answer with Scott and Marshall. You can catch us on kerncast.com on Sundays at 5 o'clock. I'm going to reach over and rip this flag off the wall right now.
Well, you're welcome to do it. It should offend us all.
Oh, I can't quite reach it.
Here
so
we
well-
go. Here we go. There we
Whoa,
go.
hey, there's sharp pins being pulled.
Do you want to be protected from that? Because never mind.
I just did.
Have a good one.
Oh my gosh. See you guys till next time. Bye.
Bye.